I invited my family to my award ceremony, hoping that for once they would look past my job title. My father Desmond laughed so hard he nearly choked on his beer. Just a lowly secretary, he scoffed, tossing the gold-embossed invitation onto the sticky coffee table. My sister Chanel did not even look up from her phone as she replied, "We are busy going to dinner at Le Ciel." My mother liked her message and told me to stay home and watch the house. I smiled and said that is fine. I did not tell them I owned the restaurant they were going to. I did not tell them I owned the bank that held their mortgage. That night, while they ate lobster they could not afford, my father scrolled his phone and froze. His face turned ash gray as he stammered, "What is this?" But by then it was too late to ask for forgiveness. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to silence your success just to keep the peace in your family. I am Ebony Jones, 32 years old, and I have spent the last decade mastering the art of being invisible in my own home. To the world, I am a ghost. To the financial district in Chicago, I am the silent partner and majority shareholder of Aura Horizon, the fastest-growing fintech firm in the state. But here in this cramped living room on the south side that smells of stale cigarette smoke and lemon pledge, I am just Ebony the secretary. The walls are lined with photos of my sister Chanel winning beauty pageants and my brother-in-law Kyle shaking hands with local councilmen. There are no pictures of me. I stood by the worn-out beige sofa watching my father Desmond wipe grease from his chin. I had just handed him the heavy cream-colored envelope containing the invitation to the Business Visionary of the Year gala. He held it like it was a piece of junk mail. He adjusted his reading glasses and squinted at the calligraphy. Ebony Jones, Visionary Award. He read the words out loud and then let out a sharp, barking laugh. He looked at me with eyes that were tired but still capable of cutting me down. "You are trying to trick your old man again, aren't you? Since when do secretaries get visionary awards? What is this for? An award for filing papers the fastest? Or maybe it is the award for the best coffee maker in the office." He tossed the invitation onto the table where it landed next to a pile of unpaid utility bills. The gold lettering shimmered under the flickering ceiling light, but he did not notice the quality of the paper. I felt the familiar burn of humiliation rising in my chest, but I pushed it down. I kept my face smooth and impassive. My hand brushed against the pocket of my blazer, where my Vertu phone sat silent. One call from that phone could buy this entire neighborhood block. But my father did not see a tycoon. He saw a disappointment. I took a slow breath and spoke clearly. "It is a significant industry event, Dad. It would mean a lot if you and Mom were there." I booked a table for the family. Desmond picked up the remote control and turned up the volume on the television, drowning out my voice. "We have better things to do than watch you walk across a stage to get a piece of paper, Ebony. You act like you are the CEO. You are support staff. Know your place. You are lucky to even have a job at a big company like Aura. Don't go embarrassing us by acting like you are one of the bosses." He waved his hand, dismissing me entirely. I looked at the invitation lying amidst the clutter of his life. For 10 years, I had paid the electricity bill for this house. I had paid for his heart medication. I had paid the property taxes so they would not be evicted. And yet in his eyes I was still the little girl who was not smart enough, not pretty enough, and definitely not successful enough. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to tell him that the CEO of Aura reported to me. But I knew the game was not over yet. I simply nodded and said, "Okay, Dad." But inside my mind, I was already calculating the fallout. If they would not come to my world, I would have to bring my world crashing down on theirs. The front door swung open and the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. My sister Chanel swept in like she was walking a runway in Milan rather than entering a small house in South Chicago. She was draped in what looked like a Hermès scarf and carried a Louis Vuitton bag that gleamed a little too brightly under the hall light. I could see the stitching on the handle was uneven, a telltale sign of a Chinatown knockoff. But to my mother Loretta, who rushed past me as if I were invisible, Chanel was the epitome of success. Behind Chanel walked her husband Kyle. He was a tall man with sandy blonde hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He wore a navy suit that was tight around the shoulders, and he carried himself with the unearned confidence of a man who believed the world owed him a favor. Loretta practically tripped over her own feet to get to them. "Oh, look who is here. My beautiful daughter and my favorite son-in-law," she squealed, embracing Kyle while completely ignoring me standing just 2 feet away. She patted his cheek with a reverence she had never shown my father, let alone me. "Come in, come in. I hope the drive was not too tiring for you, Kyle. I know how hard you work at that big firm on Wall Street." Kyle chuckled, a sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. "It is always a trek coming down to this part of town, Loretta, but for family we make the sacrifice." He said sacrifice as if visiting his in-laws was a charitable act he could write off on his taxes. Chanel finally acknowledged my presence, but only to use me as a coat rack. "Here, Ebony, hang this up and be careful with it. It is silk." She tossed her coat at me without making eye contact. I caught it reflexively, my fingers brushing against the fabric. It was definitely polyester. I watched as she paraded into the living room, her heels clicking loudly on the linoleum floor. She kissed our father on the forehead, leaving a smudge of bright red lipstick. "Daddy, you look tired. You need to let Kyle handle your finances so you can retire properly." Desmond beamed at her, his earlier grumpiness vanishing instantly. "I am just saving my energy for the big dinner tonight, Princess." I stood by the door, coat in hand, feeling the familiar sting of displacement. In this house, I was not the daughter who paid the bills. I was the help. I walked over to the closet and hung up the coat, taking a moment to compose myself. When I turned back around, Kyle had already made himself comfortable in my father's favorite armchair, the one Desmond never let anyone sit in. Kyle loosened his tie and looked around the room, his eyes landing on me with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "Ah, there she is, the little sister-in-law," he said, stretching his legs out. "I did not see you there in the corner. You blend in so well with the wallpaper." He laughed at his own joke, and my parents joined in a beat later, eager to please him. I walked slowly into the room, keeping my face neutral. "Hello, Kyle. Hello, Chanel," I said, my voice steady. Kyle waved a hand dismissively. "Yeah, hi. Listen, Ebony, be a doll and get me a glass of ice water, would you?" "Lots of ice. My throat is parched from all the client meetings today. Talking millions of dollars really dries a man out." He snapped his fingers twice. "Chop, chop. I am thirsty." The sound of his snapping fingers echoed in the sudden silence. My mother nodded enthusiastically. "Go on, Ebony. Get Kyle his water. Do not be rude. He is a guest." I looked at Kyle, who was smirking at me, waiting for me to obey. He treated me like a waitress in my own childhood home. I looked at my father, who was busy admiring Chanel's fake purse. I looked at my mother, who was looking at Kyle with adoration. A cold calm settled over me. I would get him his water. And soon I would serve him a reality check that would be much harder to swallow. I turned toward the kitchen, my heels clicking softly. "Sure, Kyle," I said over my shoulder. "I would hate for you to be uncomfortable. Enjoy the ice while it lasts." I placed the glass of water on the coaster next to Kyle, ensuring not a single drop spilled onto the table surface. He did not say thank you. He simply took a long gulp and sighed loudly, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. I decided to try one last time. I reached out and picked up the invitation from the table where my father had discarded it. The gold foil felt cool and heavy against my fingertips, a stark contrast to the cheap laminate of the coffee table. "Mom, Dad," I said, keeping my voice soft but firm, "I know Kyle has big news and I am happy for him. But this ceremony starts at 7. We could stop by for just an hour before dinner. It is a Lifetime Achievement Award. It is not just a certificate for attendance. It is the highest honor in my industry." Chanel snatched the card from my hand before my parents could respond. Her long acrylic nails painted a garish neon pink tapped against the heavy cardstock. Click, click, click. The sound was sharp and irritating, like a countdown to an explosion. She looked at the invitation and then at me with a look of pure incredulity. "Oh, please, Ebony," she sneered, shaking her head. "Do you hear yourself? You are interrupting Kyle's moment with this nonsense. He just closed a preliminary deal that could be worth millions. Millions, Ebony. Do you even know how many zeros that is, or do you only count petty cash at your desk?" She tossed the card back onto the table as if it were contaminated. "We are going to Le Ciel tonight. It is the most exclusive restaurant in the city. Reservations are impossible to get, but my amazing husband made it happen. We are not going to skip a 5-star meal at the top of the skyline to watch you get a pat on the head for being a good little secretary. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get a table at Le Ciel?" I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. I knew exactly how hard it was to get a table at Le Ciel because I had bought the restaurant 3 years ago when the previous owner went bankrupt. I signed the chef's paychecks. I approved the seasonal menus. But to them, Le Ciel was a kingdom they were lucky to visit while I was the queen incognito. I looked at my mother, hoping to find a shred of maternal instinct buried under her layers of social climbing. "Mom, Le Ciel will be there all night. Please, just 1 hour." Loretta let out a long, dramatic sigh. She looked at me with that familiar expression of pity mixed with annoyance. The look that said, "Why are you so difficult?" She adjusted the collar of her blouse and shook her head. "Honey, stop it," she said. "You are bringing down the mood. Look at your sister. Look at Kyle. They are celebrating. Why do you always have to make everything about you?" She reached out and patted my arm, but her touch was devoid of warmth. "Besides, we need someone to stay here. The neighborhood is not what it used to be, and I do not want to leave the house empty with all these nice gifts Kyle brought. You stay here and watch the house. We will bring you back a doggy bag if there are leftovers." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Stay here. Watch the house. I was 32 years old. I was a silent billionaire. And I was being told to babysit a house I had paid for, while they went to celebrate a mediocre man at a restaurant I owned. "So that is it?" I asked quietly. "I am the house sitter." "Don't be dramatic." My father grunted from his chair, finally looking up from his phone. "It is the most useful thing you can do tonight. Now stop pestering your mother and let us get ready." Kyle stood up and peeled off his navy blazer with an exaggerated flourish. He did not hand it to me or hang it up. Instead, he tossed it onto the beige sofa where it landed in a crumpled heap right next to my thigh. The smell of his expensive but overpowering cologne wafted up instantly, choking the air between us. "Since you are playing house sitter tonight, you can make yourself useful," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "Press that suit for me, steam it properly, and for God's sake do not burn it like you probably do with your own cheap clothes. That is Italian wool ebony. It costs more than your car." I looked down at the jacket. It was a mass-produced brand I recognized from the mid-tier department stores. But to Kyle, it was a royal garment. He smoothed his shirt front and checked his reflection in the hallway mirror, admiring his own jawline. "I have a massive meeting tomorrow morning," he continued, his voice booming with self-importance. 9 a.m. sharp. It is the kind of meeting that makes or breaks careers. He turned back to me, a smirk playing on his lips. "It is with a senior partner at Aura Horizon. Your company, right?" He let out a short, barking laugh. "Actually, I should not say your company. That implies you have equity. You just answer the phones there, don't you? You are just the gatekeeper for the people who actually matter." I felt a muscle in my jaw jump. He was talking about a meeting with Marcus Thorne, my vice president of strategy. A meeting I had personally authorized just yesterday to evaluate whether Kyle's boutique firm was worth a hostile takeover. He had no idea he was preparing to pitch to a man who took orders directly from me. He was bragging about entering the lion's den while mocking the lioness. "I will be stopping by the executive floor after I close the deal," he said, walking over to stand directly in front of me. He loomed over me, trying to use his height to intimidate. "If I see you, I will make sure to wave. Better yet, have a cappuccino ready for me. Extra foam. Maybe if you make it well, I will put in a good word for you with the big bosses. Help you keep that minimum wage job. You know how volatile the market is. You need all the help you can get. My fingernails dug into the palms of my hands, creating crescent-shaped indentations. The urge to slap the arrogance off his face was overwhelming. I wanted to tell him that I was the one who signed the paychecks. I wanted to tell him that his big deal was actually an audit in disguise. But I held back. The payoff would be so much sweeter if I let him walk into the trap blindfolded. I stood up slowly, meeting his gaze. I smoothed the front of my blazer and forced my lips into a polite professional smile, the kind of smile a predator gives before the strike. "Don't worry, Kyle," I said, my voice smooth and cold as liquid nitrogen. "I will ensure your experience at Aura tomorrow is unforgettable. I will take care of you personally. You have no idea how much attention I am going to give to your file." He missed the double meaning entirely. He just winked at Chanel, who was busy checking her makeup in her compact mirror. "See, babe," he said, pointing a thumb at me. "She knows who the alpha is. She knows who pays the bills in this family. Now come on, the reservations are at 7, and I do not want to keep the valet waiting." They swept past me in a cloud of perfume and arrogance, moving toward the front door, like royalty leaving a peasant dwelling. Chanel stopped briefly to check her reflection in the hallway mirror, adjusting her faux fur stole one last time. She made a show of ignoring me, stepping around me, as if I were a piece of furniture that had been placed inconveniently in her path. Kyle marched out first, twirling the keys to his white BMW on his finger. He loved that car. It was his pride and joy, a symbol of the status he desperately wanted to project. I watched him strut toward the driveway, knowing what he refused to admit, that the car was a base model on a lease he was 2 months behind on paying. I followed them out onto the porch, hugging my arms against the chill of the Chicago evening. The streetlights were just flickering on, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement of the driveway. Kyle unlocked the car with a chirp of the alarm system and held the door open for Chanel. She slid into the passenger seat with the grace of a woman who believed cameras were constantly trained on her. My mother squeezed into the back seat, arranging her dress carefully so it would not wrinkle. They looked like a picture-perfect family from a catalog. The successful husband, the beautiful wife, the doting parents, and the daughter they left behind on the porch. The engine roared to life a little too loudly in the quiet neighborhood. Kyle revved it twice, showing off the horsepower to absolutely no one. Before he pulled away, the rear window rolled down slowly. My father Desmond leaned out, his face illuminated by the dashboard lights. He looked at me standing alone under the yellow porch light and offered one last piece of unsolicited advice. "Don't get into any trouble in the house, Ebony," he called out over the rumble of the engine. "And do not order takeout. It is a waste of money. There is some leftover meatloaf in the fridge from Tuesday. You can heat that up. It is perfectly good food." He said it with the tone of a benevolent king tossing crumbs to a beggar. Meatloaf from Tuesday, while they dined on lobster thermidor and wagyu beef at my restaurant. I nodded once, my face an impassive mask. "Thanks, Dad. Enjoy your dinner." He rolled the window up, cutting off any further conversation. Kyle shifted the car into gear and peeled out of the driveway, tires screeching slightly against the asphalt. A cloud of gray exhaust smoke billowed out, hitting me squarely in the face. I coughed, waving my hand to clear the air as the red taillights of the BMW faded down the street. They were gone. They were heading to Le Ciel, thinking they were the guests of honor. They had no idea they were driving straight into the lion's den. I stood there for a moment longer until the sound of their engine disappeared completely, leaving only the distant hum of the city. The acrid smell of burnt fuel lingered in the air, but underneath it, I could smell something else, the sweet scent of impending justice. They had left Ebony, the secretary, on the porch. But the woman who was about to walk back into that house was someone they had never met before. The silence that followed their departure was not lonely, it was liberating. I did not shed a tear. Tears are for people who feel helpless, and I was the most powerful person in Chicago. I walked back into the living room, the air still thick with the scent of Kyle's cheap cologne and my mother's judgment. I locked the front door, the click of the deadbolt signaling the end of my performance. For years, I had played the role of the downtrodden daughter, shrinking myself to fit into their narrow expectations. But tonight, the curtain had fallen. I walked over to the corner where my battered tote bag sat. It was a prop scuffed and fraying at the seams, purchased at a thrift store to maintain the illusion of my struggle. I reached past the notepad and the thermos, my fingers finding the hidden compartment at the bottom. I pulled out a device that cost more than the house I was standing in. My Virtu signature touch encased in alligator leather and grade 5 titanium. It felt heavy and cold in my hand, a grounding reminder of who I really was. I pressed the ruby key on the side, the screen illuminating instantly. I did not need to scroll to find the number. I dialed Zara, my executive assistant. She picked up on the first ring as she always did. Ms. Jones. Zara's voice was crisp and efficient. "We are tracking the vehicle. They are 20 minutes away from Le Ciel." "Good," I said, my voice dropping the soft apologetic timbre I used with my family. It was now the voice that moved markets. "Send the car. I am ready to leave." And Zara, notify the management team at Le Ciel. Activate Scenario A for the Jones party. I want every card declined, every luxury upcharged, and no mercy shown. They want the VIP experience, let us give them the bill that comes with it. Understood. Scenario A is in effect, your transport is 1 minute out. I ended the call and slipped the phone into my pocket. I walked to the hallway mirror, the same one Chanel had preened in moments ago. I looked at my reflection. I straightened my spine, rolling my shoulders back. The slumped posture of the weary secretary vanished. In her place stood the shark of the South Loop. Outside, a soft purr broke the neighborhood silence. It was not the rattle of a beat-up sedan or the straining engine of a leased BMW. It was the deep, powerful hum of a 12-cylinder engine. I looked out the window. A sleek, midnight black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided to a stop in front of the peeling paint of my parents' porch. The Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament caught the light of the street lamp, shining like a beacon. The driver, a man built like a tank, stepped out and opened the rear door, standing at attention. My carriage had arrived, and unlike my family, I was not renting the lifestyle. I owned it. As the heavy door of the Rolls-Royce Phantom clicked shut, sealing me inside, the air shifted instantly. The chaotic noise of the South Side faded into a hushed silence, broken only by the soft hum of the climate control. The smell of exhaust and stale cigarettes was replaced by the rich scent of aged leather and mahogany. I did not waste a second. I reached for the black garment bag hanging on the hook behind the driver's partition. My fingers found the zipper and pulled it down, revealing a shimmer of midnight blue fabric that seemed to hold its own light. I stripped off the polyester blend skirt and the sensible white blouse that I wore to play the part of the dutiful daughter. I kicked aside the scuffed flats that pinched my toes. In the privacy of the darkened cabin, I slipped into my armor. It was a custom Givenchy gown, hand-beaded and tailored to fit my measurements perfectly. $50,000 of silk and crystal draped over my body, transforming me from the invisible secretary into the woman who graced the cover of Forbes. I checked my reflection in the vanity mirror. I took off the thick-rimmed glasses I did not actually need and let my hair down, shaking out the curls. The woman staring back at me was sharp, dangerous, and undeniably powerful. I settled into the plush leather seat and picked up the iPad Pro waiting on the center console. The screen recognized my face instantly and unlocked, displaying the live dashboard of Aura Horizon. The numbers were beautiful. The ticker symbol AURH was glowing neon green, indicating a 4% surge in stock value just today. While my father was mocking my career, my net worth had increased by $12 million in the last 8 hours alone. I swiped past the financial reports and opened a secure folder marked Due Diligence. Inside was the file I had requested my security team to compile on Sterling and Company, the boutique firm Kyle worked for. I tapped on the personnel file for Kyle Sterling. He had puffed his chest out, claiming to be a top earner, a rainmaker closing million-dollar deals. The digital document told a very different story. The text on the screen was damning. Performance rating bottom 10%. Probationary status due to missed quotas. And there in red letters was the ammunition I needed. Flagged for expense account irregularities, unauthorized client entertainment, potential embezzlement. I felt a cold smile spread across my face. Kyle was not a rising star, he was a desperate man drowning in debt and stealing from his company to keep up appearances. He was walking into a meeting with my company tomorrow, hoping to save his career, but he did not know I already held the smoking gun. He was not just an annoyance anymore, he was a liability. I closed the file and looked out the tinted window as the city skyline came into view. The lights of Chicago twinkled like diamonds, but none shone as bright as the fire burning in my chest. I was not just going to an award ceremony, I was going to an execution, and I was both the judge and the executioner. The valet looked at Kyle's white BMW with a practiced indifference that set Kyle's teeth on edge. It was the cheapest car in the lineup of Bentleys and Ferraris parked outside Le Ciel, but Kyle tossed the keys to the attendant with the arrogance of a man who owned the pavement. "Keep it close," he barked, adjusting his cuffs. "I do not want any scratches on the custom paint job." The valet barely nodded before getting into the car and driving it immediately to the overflow lot around the block. Chanel smoothed her dress and took Kyle's arm, hooking her fake Louis Vuitton bag prominently on her elbow. "This is it," she whispered loudly enough for the couple entering behind them to hear. "The most exclusive dining experience in Chicago. Kyle pulls a lot of strings to get us in here." They swept through the revolving brass doors and into the lobby, which smelled of jasmine and old money. The ceiling soared 30 feet high, adorned with a crystal chandelier that cost more than Kyle's entire lifetime earnings. Desmond and Loretta walked behind them, looking around with wide eyes, trying to mask their intimidation with critical glares. Desmond tugged at his collar, which was already tight around his neck. "Fancy place," he grumbled. "Hope the portions are not microscopic." "I hate paying for empty plates." Loretta hushed him sharply. "Be quiet, Des. Don't embarrass Kyle. Act like you belong here." Kyle marched up to the host stand where a woman with impeccable posture and a tablet stood waiting. She was the gatekeeper, and she had been briefed by my assistant Zara just minutes ago. Kyle leaned one elbow on the podium, flashing a smile that he thought was charming, but actually looked predatory. "Good evening," he said, loud enough to turn heads in the waiting area. "The name is Sterling. Kyle Sterling. I have a VIP reservation for 4. We will take the chef's table or a booth with a skyline view. Make sure it is private, I have business to discuss." The hostess looked at him. Her expression did not change. She did not smile back. She tapped her screen slowly, her finger hovering over the list. Sterling. She repeated the name as if tasting something sour. "I see a reservation here, Mr. Sterling, but I do not see any VIP designation attached to this profile. And I certainly do not see a confirmation for the chef's table. That area is reserved for our platinum members only." Kyle's smile faltered, and a flush of red crept up his neck. "That is impossible," he insisted, his voice rising. "Check again. My assistant called weeks ago. I am a vice president at a major financial firm. We need the best table. I demand to see the manager if you cannot find it." The hostess looked up from her screen, her eyes cold and unyielding. "The manager is busy attending to our actual VIP guests, sir. We are fully booked tonight. The only table available for your party size is table 94. "Table 94. Kyle repeated, assuming it was a code for something exclusive. "Is that near the window? Does it have a view of the lake?" "No, sir," the hostess replied, her voice devoid of apology. "It is adjacent to the service corridor, right next to the kitchen swing doors and the employee restrooms. It is a high-traffic area, but it is the only space we have left." Chanel let out a gasp that sounded like a deflating tire. She stepped forward, her face twisting in outrage. Next to the kitchen. You want us to sit next to the dirty dishes and the bathroom. Do you know who my husband is? He is Kyle Sterling. He is a key player at Aura Horizon. You cannot put us by the bathrooms like we are nobody. This is an insult. The hostess finally smiled, but it was a smile that did not reach her eyes. It was the smile of a predator toying with prey. I am afraid that is the only option, Mrs. Sterling. Unless you would like to forfeit your reservation. There is a waiting list of 50 people who would happily take table 94 right now. So, do you want to be seated or should I call the next name on the list? Kyle turned a deep shade of crimson, his knuckles white as he gripped the podium. He looked at the crowded lobby at the wealthy patrons watching the scene with amusement. He had no choice. He could not leave and admit defeat to his in-laws. Fine, he hissed through gritted teeth. Take us to the table. But I will be writing a scathing review about this insult. The hostess grabbed 4 menus. Right this way, she said, leading them away from the glittering dining room and toward the noisy clatter of the kitchen. While Kyle was busy berating a hostess for a table near the bathroom, I was stepping onto a carpet as red as fresh blood. The Chicago Grand Ballroom was a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns, but the moment my heel touched the velvet runner, the atmosphere shifted. The air here did not smell of desperation and cheap cologne. It smelled of power. Hundreds of flashbulbs went off simultaneously, turning the night into a blinding strobe effect. Photographers screamed my name, not with the disdain my father used, but with the hunger of men who knew a single photo of the elusive Ebony Jones was worth a month's rent. Ms. Jones over here. Ms. Jones looked to the left. The cacophony was deafening and intoxicating. I walked through the gauntlet of press with a practiced ease. Every step I took was a rejection of the woman my family thought I was. Tonight, I was not the doormat. I was the deity. At the top of the stairs stood Julian Thorne, the CEO of Nexus Tech, and a man who had tried to buy my company 3 times. He did not look at me with pity. He looked at me with fear and respect. He bowed his head slightly as I approached, a gesture of submission from one predator to another. Ebony, he said, taking my hand. You look absolutely lethal tonight. I hear the quarterly earnings for Aura are going to rewrite the market rules tomorrow. I smiled, a razor-sharp expression that promised he was right. We do not just rewrite rules, Julian. We erase them and start over. I moved deeper into the venue, my gown trailing behind me like liquid sapphire. A reporter from the Financial Times pushed forward, her recorder thrust out like a weapon. Ms. Jones, the rumors are swirling that you are making a major acquisition. Can you comment? I ignored her gliding past. I did not answer questions, I dictated reality. Near the entrance to the main hall, Marcus, my vice president, was waiting. He looked impeccable in a tuxedo, holding a glass of champagne which he handed to me immediately. He leaned in, his voice low. The team at the office is ready for the transition. And the security feed from the restaurant is live on your tablet. I took a sip of the vintage champagne, letting the bubbles burst on my tongue. It tasted like victory. Marcus glanced around the room, scanning the crowd of billionaires and power brokers. I noticed he was looking for the people who should have been standing beside me. He frowned slightly. Ebony, where are they? I thought your parents and sister were coming. I set aside a VIP box for them. You said you wanted them to see you accept the award. I looked at the golden statue waiting on the podium in the distance. I thought about my father shouting about meatloaf. I thought about Chanel mocking my invitation. I thought about Kyle threatening to fire me from my own company. They chose their stage and I chose mine. I turned to Marcus, my eyes cold and devoid of any lingering daughterly affection. They could not make it, I said, my voice flat and final. They are currently at a very exclusive dinner. They are busy enjoying their last supper. Marcus raised an eyebrow, understanding the dark undertone immediately. Then let us hope they savor every bite, he said, clinking his glass against mine. Because tomorrow they starve. The location of table 94 was every bit as humiliating as the hostess had promised. Every time the kitchen door swung open, a blast of steam and the shouting of line cooks washed over us, forcing my mother to clutch her napkin to her chest. But Kyle refused to let the ambiance ruin his performance. He picked up the leather-bound wine list, scanning the pages, not for the notes on flavor or region, but solely for the highest numbers in the right-hand column. He snapped his fingers at the sommelier, who had drifted over with a look of practiced patience. "We will start with the 1982 Chateau Margaux," Kyle announced loudly, making sure the table next to us could hear. "And bring the Magnum. We are celebrating a merger that will reshape the Chicago skyline, so do not make us wait. For the table, we will have the seafood tower, the extra-large one with the Alaskan king crab legs and the Osetra caviar. And keep the lobster coming until I say stop." My father Desmond whistled low through his teeth, his eyes widening as he did the mental math. "That bottle is more than my pension check for the whole year." He leaned back in his chair, beaming at Kyle with an adoration that bordered on worship. "Now this is how a man takes care of his family. You are a true provider, Kyle. A real king. Unlike that ungrateful daughter of mine. Ebony has been working at that office for 10 years, and she has never once bought me so much as a bowl of soup, let alone a feast like this. She claims she is broke all the time, but I know she is just stingy, saving every penny for herself while her parents starve." He shook his head, cutting into a bread roll aggressively. "It is shameful, really. She could learn a thing or two from you about generosity, about respecting your elders." While Desmond assassinated my character between bites of complimentary bread, my mother Loretta was busy curating her own version of reality. She pulled out her phone and opened Facebook, adjusting the lighting so the glare from the kitchen door was not visible. She held the phone up high, angling it to capture the crystal chandelier in the distance, while carefully cropping out the busboy clearing dirty dishes right behind her. "Hey everyone! It is Loretta live from Le Ciel," she cooed into the camera, putting on her best church lady voice. "Just enjoying a little Wednesday night dinner with my successful son-in-law and my beautiful daughter. Look at this wine list. Look at this atmosphere. We are so blessed. This is what hard work looks like, people. God is good." She panned the camera over to Kyle, who puffed out his chest and raised his glass in a mock toast. "And to think," she whispered dramatically, "some people said we would never make it to the top. Well, look at us now." She did not mention that her other daughter was currently receiving a standing ovation across town. She ended the live stream with a blowing kiss and set the phone down satisfied. The sommelier returned with the bottle, presenting the label to Kyle. Kyle waved a hand dismissively without even checking the vintage. "Just pour it," he commanded. "My throat is dry." As the dark red liquid filled the glasses, they clinked them together, toasting to a future that had already been foreclosed. They drank deeply, savoring the taste of what they thought was success, unaware that every sip was being added to a tab that would bankrupt them before dessert arrived. The waiter, standing in the shadows, tapped a command into his handheld device, confirming the order and initiating the protocol I had set in motion. The trap was set, and they were eating the bait. The spotlight hit me blinding and warm as I walked across the stage. The crystal trophy in my hand felt heavy, solid, a tangible proof of my worth that no one in my family could deny. I stood behind the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. The captains of industry, the tech giants, the venture capitalists, they were all waiting for my words. I took a deep breath. I did not need notes. I had been writing this speech in my head for 10 years. "Thank you." I began, my voice amplified, filling the cavernous hall. "Tonight, we celebrate vision. But vision is not just about seeing the future. It is about seeing the truth of the present, no matter how painful it is. In the world of finance, we talk about assets and liabilities. We talk about return on investment. But the hardest lesson I ever learned was not on Wall Street. It was in my own living room." I paused, letting the silence stretch. The audience leaned in, captivated by the raw emotion underneath my professional exterior. I continued. "I learned that there are two types of people. The builders and the parasites. The builders create value. They work in the shadows. They pay the bills. They fix the foundations. And then there are the parasites. They attach themselves to the builders. They feed on your energy, your resources, and your success. They mistake your silence for weakness and your generosity for obligation. They wear expensive suits bought with your money and claim they are the ones leading the charge. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. They thought I was talking about corporate raiders or hostile takeovers. They had no idea I was talking about a man currently eating lobster on my dime. For too long, I continued my grip tightening on the podium. I allowed these bad assets to remain on my balance sheet. I subsidized their inefficiency. I covered their debts. I let them live in the house I built while they told me I was not welcome at the table. But true leadership is knowing when to cut your losses. It is knowing when to stop feeding the beast and let it starve. Tonight, I am declaring a restructuring. I am liquidating the emotional debt and reclaiming my equity. Thunderous applause erupted. People were standing cheering for the ruthlessness of my business acumen. I smiled a small, cold curve of my lips. Just then, a static crackle buzzed in my right ear. It was the hidden earpiece I wore for security. Zara's voice came through clear and precise, cutting through the noise of the ovation. "Ms. Jones, the target has initiated payment. The Amex Black Card has been declined due to insufficient funds. He is trying the Visa now. It has also been flagged as stolen per your instruction." The waiter is approaching the table with the bad news. I looked out at the adoration of the crowd, but my mind was across town at a dimly lit table near a kitchen door. The first domino had fallen. "Thank you," I said into the microphone, my eyes glittering with dangerous amusement. "And remember, the market always corrects itself. Eventually, the bill always comes due." Back at Le Ciel, the atmosphere at table 94 shifted from celebratory to catastrophic in the blink of an eye. Kyle was in the middle of a story about how he single-handedly saved a portfolio from crashing when a shadow fell across the table. It was the waiter holding a small black leather folder. He did not place it on the table discreetly, as was the custom in fine dining. Instead, he held it tight against his chest, his expression grave. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling?" the waiter said, his voice cutting through Kyle's laughter. "We have a problem with the payment method provided." Kyle frowned, wiping a smear of butter from his lip. "What are you talking about? I gave you my Amex Black. That card has no limit. Just run it again. You probably chipped the chip or something." He waved his hand dismissively, eager to get back to his audience. "I have attempted the transaction 3 times, sir." The waiter replied loud enough for the table of socialites next to them to pause their conversation. "The card has been declined by the issuer. The code indicates insufficient funds and a potential freeze on the account." The silence that followed was absolute. My father Desmond dropped his fork. Chanel looked at her husband, her eyes widening in alarm. Kyle laughed, but it was a nervous, high-pitched sound. "That is ridiculous. I just paid off the balance last week. It must be a system error on your end. Here." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a sleek platinum Visa. "Use this one, and make sure you get it right this time. I do not appreciate being interrupted during dinner." The waiter took the card without a word and walked away toward the terminal station, which was visible from their table. Kyle leaned back, trying to regain his composure. "Banks," he muttered, shaking his head. "They freeze accounts for the smallest things these days. Probably saw a large transaction and got spooked. Just security protocols, you know how it is. But I knew exactly how it was because I was the security protocol." Sitting miles away in the green room of the gala, I watched the notification pop up on my tablet. "Transaction attempted, Visa. Platinum ending in 4092. Status declined. Reason guarantor revocation." For years, Kyle believed his credit score was immaculate. He believed his high limits were a result of his financial wizardry. He never knew that 7 years ago, when he and Chanel were first married and drowning in credit card debt, I had quietly stepped in. I had used my standing as a private wealth client to guarantee their lines of credit. I was the silent cosigner, the invisible net that caught them every time they fell. They thought they were flying, but they were just tethered to my bank account. And tonight, I had cut the rope. The waiter returned, his face even more stern than before. I am sorry, sir. This card has also been declined. The issuer has flagged it as invalid. Do you have another form of payment? The bill currently stands at $3,400. Kyle's face turned a deep shade of crimson that matched the wine he could not pay for. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. That is impossible, he stammered, standing up. There is money in those accounts. I am a vice president. I demand you run it again manually. I cannot do that. Sir, the waiter said, stepping back as two large men in dark suits, the restaurant security, began to move toward the table. We need a valid form of payment immediately, or we will be forced to involve the authorities. Chanel grabbed Kyle's arm, her fake nails digging into his suit jacket. Kyle, do something. Everyone is staring. Pay the man. But for the first time in his life, Kyle Sterling had absolutely nothing to offer. The humiliation at table 94 was thick enough to choke on. The security guards took a step closer, crossing their arms over their chests in a silent threat that screamed law enforcement. Kyle looked at his platinum card lying useless on the white tablecloth like a dead insect. He was trembling not just from fear, but from the sudden shattering of his ego. He needed a reason. He needed a scapegoat. Because in the world of Kyle Sterling, nothing was ever his fault. It was the market. It was the banks. It was the economy. But tonight, none of those excuses would satisfy the stone-faced waiter demanding $3,000. Chanel leaned in close, her voice dropping to a hiss that the microphone on the table picked up clearly. She looked at her husband and then glanced around the room, searching for a villain. Her eyes narrowed. Think about it, Kyle. This does not make any sense. You are a top earner. The bank loves you. There is only one explanation for this glitch. She paused, letting the suspense build before delivering her verdict. It is Ebony. Kyle looked at her, confused. What does Ebony have to do with my credit cards? She is just a secretary. Exactly. Chanel whispered, her fake eyelashes fluttering rapidly as she constructed her conspiracy theory. She is a secretary at Aura Horizon, the company that handles your clearing accounts. She has access to the system, Kyle. She probably went into the HR portal and messed with your direct deposit or flagged your accounts as suspicious. You know how jealous she is of us. She saw you happy. She saw us coming to Le Ciel, and she decided to sabotage you from her little cubicle. The realization washed over Kyle like a lifeline. It was perfect. It absolved him of all responsibility. He was not broke, he was a victim of corporate espionage. He was not a failure, he was being targeted by a vindictive sister-in-law. The fear in his eyes was instantly replaced by a self-righteous fury. You are right. He slammed his fist on the table, causing the silverware to rattle. That miserable little rat. She has been trying to undermine me for years. She probably used her admin privileges to freeze my assets temporarily. She thinks this is funny. She thinks she can embarrass me in front of my family and get away with it. My father Desmond shook his head, his face twisting in disgust. I knew it. I knew that girl was trouble, always sneaking around with her secrets, sabotaging her own family. Call her Kyle. Call her and tell her to fix this mess right now, or so help me God. I will disown her for good this time. Kyle reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his hands shaking with rage. I am not just going to call her, he spat, unlocking the screen. I am going to destroy her. I am going to scream at her until she is begging for forgiveness. And then on Monday morning, I'm going to walk into her boss office and have her fired for gross misconduct. She messed with the wrong vice president. He pulled up her contact info, his thumb hovering over the call button. He looked at the waiter and held up a finger. Give me 1 minute. It is a clerical error caused by a disgruntled employee. I am handling it now. He tapped the screen and held the phone up waiting for the connection. He had no idea that his call was about to be broadcast to 2,000 of the most powerful people in Chicago. He thought he was calling a secretary. He was about to wake the dragon. Kyle held his smartphone up high like a weapon, ensuring that everyone in the immediate vicinity could witness his authority. He tapped the speakerphone icon with a violent jab of his thumb, his face contorted in a mask of self-righteous indignation. He looked at the waiter with a sneer that said, "Watch and learn." He looked at my parents, who were watching him with bated breath, hoping he could fix the humiliation they were currently drowning in. To them, this was just a phone call to a subordinate. To Kyle, it was a performance. He needed to prove that he was still the man in charge, that the declined cards were merely a technical glitch caused by an incompetent underling. He dialed my number, and the soft, trilling ringtone echoed through the silent tension of Table 94. Across the city, the scene could not have been more different. I stood at the podium, the heavy crystal award cooling my palm, the applause finally dying down to a respectful hush. My phone, which I had placed face up on the lectern, began to vibrate. The name Kyle Sterling flashed across the screen. It was the call I had been waiting for. The timing was so perfect it felt scripted. I looked out at the audience of 2,000 industry titans. They were waiting for my closing remarks. Instead, they were about to witness a live demonstration of my speech. I caught the eye of the lead sound engineer in the tech booth at the back of the auditorium. We had rehearsed this. I gave him a subtle nod, tapping the microphone stand twice. It was the signal. Patch the audio. Override the house music. Put the call on the main speakers. The engineer gave me a thumbs up. A low hum of static filled the massive ballroom as the Bluetooth connection linked my phone to the stadium-quality sound system. The ringing stopped. The line connected. I did not say hello. I simply waited, letting the silence stretch. I wanted Kyle to speak first. I wanted his voice to fill every corner of this room. I wanted his arrogance to be recorded in high-definition audio. Back at the restaurant, Kyle assumed I was cowering in my apartment. He leaned into his phone, his voice dripping with venom, loud enough for the waiter and the neighboring tables to hear. "You pick up right now, you useless little girl," his voice boomed through the ballroom speakers at the gala. It was amplified to a deafening volume, hitting the audience like a physical blow. The billionaires and CEOs in the front row jumped in their seats. Heads turned. Whispers erupted. Who was this man screaming at the guest of honor? Kyle, oblivious to the fact that he was currently broadcasting live to the people who controlled the Chicago economy, continued his tirade. "I know what you did, Ebony. Do not try to hide it. I am at Le Ciel with your parents, and my credit cards are being declined. You messed with the banking authorization, didn't you? You went into the system at work and flagged my accounts because you are jealous. Fix it. Fix it right now, or I swear on my life you will be cleaning toilets by Monday morning." The gasps in the ballroom were audible. I saw Julian Thorne, the CEO of Nexus Tech, jaw drop. I saw the press pool frantically checking their recording devices to ensure they were capturing this. Kyle thought he was scolding a secretary. He had no idea he was digging his own grave with a megaphone. I leaned into the microphone, my voice calm, smooth, and projected to thousands. "I am listening, Kyle. Please continue. Tell everyone exactly who you think you are." The sound of Kyle's voice exploding from the state-of-the-art sound system was not just loud, it was a physical assault on the senses. The ballroom, which had been hushed in reverence just moments ago, was now filled with the shrill, distorted rage of a mediocre man. "You little brat, where the hell are you?" Kyle's voice bounced off the vaulted ceiling, shaking the crystal teardrops on the chandeliers. "Why is my card declined? Did you think you could pull a fast one on me and I would not notice? I am going to make you regret the day you were born." 2,000 of the most influential people in America sat frozen in their seats. These were men and women who controlled hedge funds, directed global policy, and built empires of technology. They were used to polished speeches and polite applause. They were not used to hearing raw, abusive entitlement broadcast at 90 decibels. A collective gasp rippled through the room like a wave. I saw the wife of a senator cover her mouth with a gloved hand, her eyes wide with shock. I saw the CEO of a rival bank lean forward, his face darkening with disgust. They were witnessing exactly what I had described in my speech. The parasite was revealing itself. Kyle had no idea he was the star of the show. He continued his tirade, his voice cracking with the strain of his own fury. I know you are hiding somewhere laughing, but you won't be laughing when I get hold of your boss. Do you hear me, Ebony? I am going to call the senior partners at Aura Horizon personally. I am going to tell them their receptionist is using company access to harass a vice president. You will be out on the street before you can even pack your pathetic little box of personal items. Do you believe me? Do you believe I have the power to ruin you? I stood center stage, one hand resting casually on the podium, the other holding the microphone. I did not flinch. I did not look afraid. I looked out at the audience and raised a single finger to my lips, signaling them to remain silent. They obeyed instantly. The room was so quiet that the only sound was the heavy breathing of Kyle on the other end of the line and the faint clatter of silverware from the restaurant in the background. It was a surreal moment of theater. The predator was threatening the apex hunter, thinking she was still prey. Kyle's voice dropped to a menacing growl, the volume perfectly captured by the high-definition audio link. You are quiet now, aren't you? Good. That means you are scared. Now listen to me very carefully. Unfreeze my cards, call the bank and apologize for your error. And then I want you to transfer $5,000 to my account as an apology fee. If you do that, maybe I will let you keep your job. Maybe. But you better hurry, because my patience is wearing thin. The audacity of the demand hung in the air. He was not just abusive, he was an extortionist. I looked at Marcus standing in the wings. He was shaking his head slowly, a look of disbelief on his face. Even he, knowing my family history, had not expected Kyle to be this foolish. But I had. I knew exactly who Kyle was, and now so did the entire business world. I leaned into the microphone, my voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to his chaotic screaming. The audience leaned in with me, waiting for the hammer to drop. I leaned closer to the microphone, my voice calm and resonant, booming through the speakers of the grand ballroom and echoing back into the receiver of the phone. I asked a simple question, but it carried the weight of an interrogation. Kyle, who are you talking to right now? Are you speaking to the bank? Or are you speaking to your brother-in-law? Or perhaps you are speaking to the woman whose house you just left without so much as a thank you. The question hung in the air, amplified to a terrifying volume. In the ballroom, 2,000 people held their breath. They watched as I stood alone on the stage, a solitary figure against a backdrop of velvet curtains, dismantling a bully with nothing but composure. But on the other end of the line, Kyle did not hear the echo of a stadium. He did not hear the judgment of the elite. He only heard a woman he had spent years belittling, and his ego was too bruised to recognize the danger he was in. He let out a scoff that sounded like a gunshot over the speakers. Don't play dumb with me, Ebony. He spat, his voice dripping with condescension. I know exactly who I'm talking to. I am talking to a lowly secretary who thinks she can pull a power trip on her superiors. Do not pretend you have any authority here. You answer phones. You file papers. You fetch coffee. That is your reality. Now stop wasting my time and unblock my card immediately. He paused to take a breath, but his rant was far from over. I could hear the clatter of dishes in the background, the sound of a restaurant that was quickly losing patience with him. I am entertaining guests. Ebony, he shouted, his voice rising an octave. I have important people at this table. My wife, your parents, people who actually matter in this world. Do you understand what humiliation is? No, of course you don't, because you have no reputation to lose. But I do. I am a sterling. I have a standing in this city, and I will not let a jealous little nobody ruin my night. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. He was screaming about his reputation while simultaneously destroying it in front of the very people he aspired to impress. He claimed to be entertaining guests, Yet he was demanding I pay for their meal. He called me a nobody, while my face was currently being broadcast on the nightly news. I looked down at the phone resting on the podium. I could have hung up. I could have ended it there. But the lesson was not finished. He needed to understand the magnitude of his mistake. I let his words settle over the crowd, allowing the silence to stretch until it became uncomfortable. The audience was no longer just shocked, they were angry. They were witnessing the brutality of entitlement firsthand. I saw a tech billionaire in the front row shake his head, his face grim. I saw the hostility in the eyes of the women in the room who recognized the tone of a man who despises female power. "Kyle," I said softly, my voice smooth as silk wrapped around a dagger. "You are right about one thing. You are entertaining guests. But you seem to have forgotten who is paying for the ticket. You called me a lowly secretary. Is that really all you see when you look at me? Or is that just what you need to see to make yourself feel big?" Kyle laughed, a harsh barking sound. "I see what is there, Ebony. A sad, lonely woman with a cat and a rental car. Now, for the last time, unblock the damn card before I come down to that office and make a scene you will never forget." I smiled. He wanted to make a scene. I decided to give him the biggest stage on earth. Kyle let out a breath that sounded like a hiss of steam escaping a pressure valve. He was waiting for me to apologize, to beg for his forgiveness, to fix the glitch that was ruining his night. Instead, I gave him the cold, hard mathematics of his existence. "Kyle, your card was not declined because of a system error or a security flag," I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling of the ballroom and reverberating in the tiny speaker of his phone. "It was declined because of a credit limit, a limit that is strictly tied to your verifiable income. According to the payroll documents you submitted to the bank, your monthly take-home pay after taxes is exactly $3,000. I paused to let that number sink in. $3,000. In a city like Chicago, that was barely enough to cover rent and utilities for the lifestyle he pretended to lead. "The bill for the vintage wine and the seafood tower you just consumed is currently sitting at $5,200, I continued. "You have spent nearly 2 months of your salary in less than 2 hours. So I have a very simple question for you, Kyle. If I had not been secretly paying your credit card bills for the last 5 years, whose money were you planning to use tonight? Because it certainly was not yours." The silence that fell over table 94 was heavy and suffocating. The diners at the adjacent tables, who had been annoyed by the shouting earlier, were now leaning in, their faces twisted in a mixture of shock and malicious amusement. The veil of wealth had been ripped away, exposing the ugly truth underneath. My father Desmond looked at the empty bottle of Chateau Margaux sitting in the center of the table. He looked at the half-eaten lobster claws, his face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray as the reality of the situation crashed down on him. For years he had worshipped Kyle as the provider, the financial genius, the son he never had. Now he was realizing that the man sitting across from him could not even afford the breadbasket. 3,000, Desmond whispered, his voice trembling. "You told me you were making 6 figures. You told me you were a partner." Kyle felt the walls closing in. The waiter was staring at him with open contempt. His wife was looking at him with horror. And my voice was still coming from the phone, calm and relentless, dismantling his life piece by piece. Panic took over. He did what narcissists always do when cornered. He denied reality. "You are lying," he screamed into the phone, his voice cracking with hysteria. "You are making this up to humiliate me. I am a director at Sterling and Company. I manage portfolios worth millions. Do not you dare talk about my salary like you know anything. You are just a jealous secretary making up lies because you are miserable." He looked around the restaurant, his eyes wild, seeking validation from anyone. "She is lying," he yelled at the waiter. "My sister-in-law is crazy. She is trying to ruin my reputation. Run the card again. I have the money. I am rich." But the waiter did not move. And in the ballroom across town, I decided it was time to stop telling him the truth and start showing him. You say you are a director, Kyle, I said, my voice dropping an octave. And you say I am just a secretary. Let us see if we can clear up that confusion once and for all. Look up, Kyle. Look at the television on the wall behind you. You think I am hiding in a cubicle, Kyle, I said into the microphone, my voice steady and commanding. You think I am afraid of you calling my superiors, but I think it is time for a performance review. And since you enjoy an audience so much, let us make this a multimedia experience. Raise your head, Kyle. Look at the 60-inch monitor mounted above the bar to your right. I want you to look your boss in the eye. At Le Ciel, the ambient jazz music was interrupted by a sharp static glitch. The large ultra-high-definition screen that usually displayed harmless looped footage of French vineyards suddenly flickered. It went black for a split second, causing patrons to look up in confusion. Then the feed cut abruptly to the live broadcast from the Chicago Grand Ballroom. The image was crisp, undeniable, and larger than life. There I was. Not in a gray cardigan, not holding a notepad. I was standing center stage, bathed in golden spotlight, wearing a custom midnight blue gown that cost more than Kyle's beloved BMW. I was holding the crystal trophy in one left hand and the phone to my ear with the right. The camera zoomed in on my face, capturing the cold, hard look in my eyes. "Can you hear me now?" I asked. My voice came from the phone in Kyle's hand, and simultaneously from the restaurant speakers, creating a surround sound effect of pure dominance. On the screen, my lips moved in perfect synchronization with the words he was hearing. Kyle slowly lifted his eyes. His face, which had been red with rage, drained of all color, turning a ghostly parchment white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He saw the chyron at the bottom of the screen. The bold white letters against the breaking news blue background read, Ebony Jones, founder and majority shareholder, Aura Horizon Group, estimated net worth $2.1 billion. The phone slipped slightly in his sweaty grip. He looked from the screen to the phone and back again, trying to process the impossibility of what he was seeing. The cognitive dissonance was shattering his reality. The woman he had ordered to iron his suit was currently being applauded by the city's elite. The woman he threatened to fire was the one who signed the paychecks of the men he reported to. My father Desmond choked on a piece of bread, coughing violently as he stared at the screen. "That is Ebony," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the television. "Why is she on the news? Why does it say billion with a B?" He looked at the waiter, seeking confirmation that this was a prank, but the waiter was also staring at the screen with a look of newfound respect. Chanel let out a sound that was half gasp, half whimper. She looked at her own fake designer bag and then at the genuine diamonds glittering around my neck on the screen. The envy was toxic, but the fear was stronger. She realized instantly that every mean text, every snide comment, every time she treated me like a servant, had been observed by a woman who could buy and sell her existence 1,000 times over. "I told you I would take care of you personally, Kyle," I said into the phone, my image on the screen smiling a cold, terrifying smile that sent shivers down his spine. "So here I am, your sister-in-law, your scapegoat, and as of this morning, the owner of the firm that employs you. Do you still want to speak to a manager, Kyle? Or are you ready to listen to the owner?" The entire restaurant fell silent, waiting for his answer. But the man who loved to hear himself talk was finally struck dumb. The silver spoon slipped from my father's numb fingers and hit the rim of his soup bowl with a violent clatter that echoed like a gunshot in the silent restaurant. Thick orange bisque splashed onto his tie and stained the pristine white tablecloth, but Desmond did not even blink. He sat frozen like a statue carved from regret, staring up at the 60-inch monitor. The man who had spent his entire life measuring success by the loudness of a voice and the flashiness of a car was now looking at the quiet, undeniable power of his own daughter. The chyron scrolling across the bottom of the screen in bold breaking news read, was impossible to misread. Ebony Jones, chairwoman of Aura Horizon, Chicago's youngest self-made billionaire. Beside him, my mother Loretta let out a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a choke. Her hand flew to her throat, clutching her string of imitation pearls as if they were strangling her. Her mouth hung open, but no words came out. She looked from the television screen where I stood bathed in golden light to the empty chair at their table where she had told me I wasn't welcome. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had left a billionaire on her front porch to eat dinner with a fraud. She had chosen the son-in-law who couldn't pay for his own wine over the daughter who owned the vineyard. Kyle was the last to process the magnitude of his destruction. He stood paralyzed, his phone still pressed to his ear, his eyes darting frantically between the device in his sweating hand and the giant image of me looming over him. The sync was perfect. My lips on the screen moved in time with the voice in his ear. There was no lag, there was no trick. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse in a cheap suit. He lowered the phone slowly, his hands trembling so violently he nearly dropped it into the melting ice of the seafood tower. "Woo! What is this?" he stammered, his voice a broken whisper that was pathetic compared to the booming arrogance he had displayed just minutes ago. "This is a trick. It has to be. You hacked the station. This is not real. You are a secretary. I know you are." But the denial rang hollow in the room filled with people who knew better. A man at the adjacent table, a hedge fund manager I had done business with, lowered his fork and looked at Kyle with pity. "That is no trick, son," he said loud enough for the entire section to hear. "That is Ebony Jones. She acquired my partner's firm last year in a cash deal. You are screaming at a woman who could buy this entire building with the change in her pocket." Desmond turned slowly to look at Kyle. The adoration in his eyes had vanished, replaced by a dawning horror. "You said she was a secretary," he rasped, his voice shaking. "You said she fetched coffee. You said she was a nobody. You told us she was jealous of you." Kyle backed away, shaking his head, his back hitting the wall near the kitchen door. "I did not know," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I swear, I did not know. She never told me." On the screen, I leaned closer to the camera, my eyes locking onto the lens as if I were staring directly into his soul. "You did not know because you never asked Kyle. You never looked past the job title. You never looked past your own ego. You were so busy trying to feel big that you never noticed you were standing in my shadow." The waiter stepped forward, picking up the declined credit card from the table with the tips of 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated waste. "I believe this belongs to you, sir," he said coldly. "And I believe you have a bill to settle. Or should we ask Ms. Jones to cover it for you one last time?" Kyle looked at the waiter, then at the screen, then at his wife, who was shrinking away from him in disgust. The floor was not opening up to swallow him, but I could see in his eyes that he wished it would. The broadcast on the wall did not cut to commercial. It zoomed in closer on my face, the high-definition screen capturing every nuance of my expression. I looked like a judge pronouncing a death sentence. "By the way, Kyle," I said, my voice smooth and devoid of mercy, "you mentioned you had a meeting at Aura Horizon tomorrow morning at 9. You were planning to pitch your portfolio to the senior partners. I am afraid I have to cancel that appointment." Kyle blinked, his mind struggling to catch up. "Cancel?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the restaurant. "Yes." I continued, addressing not just him, but the entire city of Chicago watching the feed. "As the majority shareholder, I have a fiduciary duty to protect my company from bad actors. And after reviewing your file, I discovered a pattern of irregularities. The inflated expense reports, the client dinners that never happened, the unauthorized transfers to your personal accounts. It is all there in black and white." I paused, letting the accusation hang in the air like a guillotine. "So I signed a different document for you tonight. You are fired, Kyle. Effective immediately. For cause. Security has already cleared out your desk. If you step foot in the lobby tomorrow, you will be arrested for trespassing." The words hit the restaurant like a physical shockwave. Fired. The word echoed off the tiled walls. Kyle Sterling, the man who had just ordered a $2,000 bottle of wine to celebrate his success, was now unemployed and publicly shamed on live television. He slumped against the wall, his legs giving out, sliding down until he hit the floor in a heap of expensive fabric and ruined pride. But it was Chanel who shattered the silence. She stood up, knocking her chair backward with a violent crash. Her face was a mask of twisted, ugly denial. She looked at the screen, then at her husband on the floor, and finally at the patrons staring at her. She could not process the shift in power. In her mind, the hierarchy was fixed. She was the princess, I was the peasant. No, she screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical, causing the diners to recoil. This is fake. That is not real. She is lying. She pointed a trembling finger at the monitor, her acrylic nail looking like a claw. She is just a secretary. She is a nobody. She is adopted. She is not even one of us. The insult she had used to torment me in private for years finally came out in a public scream. She shouted it as if my biology somehow negated my bank account. We took her in. She is a charity case. Where would a stray like her get that kind of money? She stole it. She must have stolen it from you, Kyle. She grabbed Kyle by the lapels of his suit, shaking him desperately, trying to revive the delusion they lived in. Tell them, Kyle. Tell them she is a fraud. Tell them she is just the help. She cannot fire you. You are a Sterling, she is nothing. But Kyle did not answer. He was staring at the floor, seeing his life flash before his eyes, the debts, the lies, the house of cards that had just been blown over by the sister-in-law he had called a loser. The restaurant manager stepped forward, his patience finally exhausted. "Ma'am, please lower your voice," he said sternly, signaling for the security team. "You are disturbing the other guests." "Disturbing the guests," Chanel shrieked, spinning around, her eyes wild. "I am the guest. My sister is a thief. That video is a fake. I demand you turn it off. Turn it off right now." She grabbed a bread plate and hurled it at the television, but it missed, wide, shattering against the wall. The sound of breaking china was the final punctuation mark on their social suicide. The sound of the china plate shattering against the silk wallpaper was the final bell. The dining room did not gasp this time. The patrons simply watched with the cold judgment of the upper class witnessing a public execution. The general manager, a man who usually moved with the stealth of a shadow, marched toward table 94. He was flanked by two security guards, who looked less like restaurant staff and more like linebackers for the Chicago Bears. They did not look happy about the damage to their establishment. Kyle was still on the floor, trying to pull himself up by the tablecloth, which only threatened to pull the seafood tower down on top of him. He looked up at the manager, expecting some form of customer service apology or perhaps a negotiation. Instead, he found a wall of black suits. The manager looked down at him, his face impassive. He did not offer a hand to help Kyle up. He simply adjusted his cuffs and spoke with a voice that carried to every corner of the silent room. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling. Or should I say, Mr. Former Employee?" The title hung in the air, stinging more than any insult. The manager gestured to the broken plate and the unpaid bill lying on the table like a verdict. "Given the recent broadcast regarding your employment status and the fact that your financial guarantor has revoked all access, we have a significant problem. You have consumed over $5,000 of product. You have destroyed private property, and you are currently disturbing our actual paying guests." Kyle stammered, trying to find his voice. "I will pay. I just need to make a call. My wife has money. Chanel, give them your card." Chanel froze, clutching her fake bag tight to her chest. She knew her cards were maxed out on appearances on dresses she returned the next day and on maintaining a lifestyle she could not afford. She shook her head, stepping back from her husband as if poverty were contagious. "I do not have it, Kyle. You said you were handling it. You said you were the provider." The manager smiled, a thin, humorless curve of his lips. "I assumed as much. Since you clearly lack the capacity to settle this debt and have engaged in what legally constitutes theft of services, we have taken the liberty of contacting the authorities. The Chicago Police Department is already outside." My father Desmond stood up, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. Police! You cannot call the police on us. We are respectable people. My daughter is on that television. She is a billionaire. She will fix this. The manager turned his cold gaze to Desmond. Your daughter, Mr. Jones, is indeed a billionaire, and she is the one who instructed us to follow full protocol for any non-paying customers, regardless of biological relation. She made it very clear that there are to be no exceptions. You are not guests of Ms. Jones tonight. You are simply trespassers. One of the security guards stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on Kyle's shoulder. It was not a suggestion. It was an arrest in motion. We are going to escort you to the curb now, sir, the guard rumbled. The officers are waiting to take your statement, and I suggest you do not struggle. You have already caused enough damage for one lifetime. Kyle looked at the door, then at his family, then at the screen where my image was still watching him. He realized then that the trap had snapped shut. There was no way out. He was being evicted from the life he pretended to own. The wail of sirens pierced the heavy oak doors of Le Ciel, drowning out the soft jazz and the murmurs of the shocked patrons. Blue and red strobe lights flashed against the crystal chandeliers, turning the elegant dining room into a chaotic disco of law enforcement. The restaurant manager did not even flinch. He held the door open as two uniformed officers from the Chicago Police Department marched in. They did not look like they were there to take a reservation. Their faces were set in grim determination, the kind reserved for dealing with public nuisances who think the rules do not apply to them. Kyle was still slumped against the wall near the kitchen entrance, looking like a deflated balloon in an expensive suit. When he saw the uniforms, his eyes widened in terror. He tried to scramble to his feet, but his legs were like jelly. The alcohol, the fear, and the sudden destruction of his reality had left him unable to stand. The general manager did not waste words. He pointed a sharp, manicured finger directly at the huddle of misery near the kitchen door. That is the individual, he said, his voice cutting through the silence. Theft of services, destruction of property, and disorderly conduct. We want to press full charges. The officers moved with practiced efficiency. They hauled Kyle up by his armpits, ignoring his weak protests. "I'll watch the suit," he whimpered, a pathetic shadow of the man who had been screaming at me just minutes ago. "That is Italian wool." "You have the right to remain silent," the officer grunted, spinning Kyle around and slamming him against the wall. "I suggest you use it. You have already said enough tonight." The metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place was the loudest sound in the room. It signaled the end of his career and the death of his ego. My sister Chanel stood frozen, her hands over her mouth, watching her husband being restrained like a common criminal. But it was my father Desmond who finally snapped out of his shock. He could not believe what was happening. In his mind, the Jones family was above this. We were respectable. We were not the kind of people who got arrested at dinner. He scrambled to his feet, knocking over his chair in his haste. "Wait, stop!" he shouted, stepping in front of the officers, his arms raised in a futile attempt to block their path. "You are making a huge mistake. You cannot take him away. Do you know who we are?" The lead officer stopped and looked Desmond up and down, taking in the lobster bisque stained on his tie and the desperation in his eyes. "Sir, step aside or you will be joining him for obstruction of justice." Desmond pointed a shaking finger at the 60-inch screen where my image was still watching them. "I am Desmond Jones," he announced, his voice cracking. "I am the father of Ebony Jones, the billionaire. The woman on that screen is my daughter. She owns this city. You cannot arrest my son-in-law without hearing from her." The officer looked up at the television screen where I stood holding my award, and then looked back down at the man claiming to be my patriarch. He let out a dry, humorless chuckle that stung worse than a baton strike. "If you are the father of a billionaire, sir," the officer said loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear, "then why are you letting your son-in-law go to jail over a dinner tab? Why don't you just pay the bill yourself?" Desmond opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. The question hung in the air, exposing his poverty and his hypocrisy for everyone to see. He had no money, he had no power, he only had the name of the daughter he had rejected, and even that name could not save him now. The officer shook his head and shoved Kyle forward, beginning the long, humiliating walk of shame through the dining room, while Desmond stood helpless in the ruins of his pride. The humiliation inside Le Ciel was far from over. Kyle had been dragged out in cuffs, but the bill remained on the table, a paper specter of their gluttony. The general manager turned his gaze to Chanel and my parents. "The debt must be secured," he stated, his voice devoid of the earlier hospitality. "We will require collateral until this matter is resolved legally." He pointed a manicured finger at the gold watch glinting on Chanel's wrist and the handbag she was clutching like a lifeline. "Leave those," Chanel gasped, stepping back. "You cannot be serious. This is a Rolex. It is worth more than your car. And this bag is vintage Louis Vuitton. I am not giving them to you." The manager did not argue. He simply nodded to the security guards who stepped forward, imposing and silent. The threat was clear: hand them over, or join Kyle in the back of a squad car. With trembling hands, Chanel unclasped the watch and slid the bag off her shoulder. "Be careful with them," she whimpered. The manager took the items, his eyes scanning them with the expertise of a man who dealt with genuine wealth daily. He turned the watch over, inspecting the clasp, and then ran a thumb over the stitching of the bag. A dry, cruel chuckle escaped his lips. "I suspect the pawnshop value of these counterfeits will hardly cover the cost of the appetizers," he said loud enough for the staff to hear. "But we will retain them as evidence of your attempted fraud. Now get out." The heavy oak doors were opened not with a bow but with a shove. My family stumbled out onto the pavement, the warmth and golden light of the restaurant slamming shut behind them. The Chicago night greeted them with a brutal slap of wind. The temperature had dropped significantly, and the first flakes of snow were beginning to fall, drifting down from the dark sky to settle on their exposed skin and expensive yet thin clothing. My father Desmond stood shivering in his suit, the lobster stain on his tie now freezing into a stiff crust. He looked at the closed doors, then at the empty street where Kyle's police cruiser had disappeared. The reality of their situation began to set in. They had no car keys, as Kyle had them in his pocket. They had no money. They had no coats, as they had checked them in and in the chaos had been ejected without retrieving them. "Ebony, my mother," Loretta said, her teeth chattering. She fumbled for her phone with numb fingers, the screen glowing bright in the gloom. "Ebony will fix this. She has to. She is our daughter. She cannot leave us out here like this." She dialed my number, putting it on speaker, her face twisted in a mixture of hope and desperation. The line rang once, then twice. Then, instead of my voice, a crisp, pre-recorded message played. It was the voice of a professional AI assistant, cool and detached. "The subscriber you have dialed is currently serving as chairman of Aura Horizon and is unavailable. For business inquiries, please contact her executive office to schedule an appointment. For all other matters, please leave a message. Note: unscheduled solicitations will be blocked." The line went dead. Loretta stared at the phone as if it had bitten her. The message was not just a rejection, it was a wall. A wall built of success and boundaries that she could no longer climb over with guilt or manipulation. The snow fell harder, dusting their shoulders in white, as they stood alone on the sidewalk, realizing that the daughter they had treated as a servant was now the queen they could not reach. The taxi ride back to the south side was the longest 40 minutes of their lives. Without Kyle's BMW and stripped of their fake luxury accessories, my family was forced to cram into the back of a smelling yellow cab that had seen better days. The heater was broken, blasting lukewarm air that did nothing to combat the freezing Chicago night. Chanel sat in the middle, shivering uncontrollably in her thin dress, her mascara running down her cheeks in black rivulets. She was not crying for her husband, who was currently being fingerprinted at the precinct. She was crying because she had to touch thighs with her parents in a vehicle that smelled of stale tobacco and desperation. When the cab finally pulled up to the curb in front of the house, the driver did not offer to open the door. He simply tapped the meter, which read $28.50. My father Desmond patted his pockets, his face pale. He realized he had left his wallet in his coat, which was still at the coat check at Le Ciel. My mother Loretta began frantically digging through the bottom of her purse, pulling out lint-covered quarters and crumpled dollar bills. It was a pathetic display. The family that had just ordered a seafood tower was now counting pennies to pay a cabbie. They barely scraped together exactly $29. The driver looked at the handful of change with disgust and sped off, leaving them standing on the icy sidewalk without so much as a goodbye. But the cold was forgotten the moment they turned toward the house. The scene before them was chaotic and terrifying. The front lawn, usually the pride of Desmond Jones, was illuminated by harsh industrial floodlights. A massive moving truck was parked in the driveway, its ramp extended like a tongue ready to swallow their lives. Men in gray coveralls were marching in and out of the front door carrying furniture. My mother screamed, "That is my sofa. Put that down. What are you doing?" She watched in horror as two movers hauled out her prized beige sectional, the one she had forbidden me to sit on for years. They dumped it unceremoniously onto the wet snow, where the fabric immediately began to soak up the slush. Next came the dining table, then the television Desmond had been watching just hours ago. It was not a robbery. It was an eviction executed with military precision. Desmond ran forward, his face purple with rage. "Get off my property! I will sue you! I will call the police!" He stopped dead in his tracks before he could reach the porch. Blocking the entrance stood three men. They were not movers. They were dressed in immaculate black suits that cost more than Kyle's annual salary. They stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a human barricade. One of them, a tall man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, stepped forward. He held a clipboard against his chest like a shield. "Mr. Jones," the lawyer said, his voice cutting through the noise of the moving crew, "I would advise you not to take another step. This property has been secured by the owner. You are currently trespassing." Desmond looked at the lawyer like he was speaking a foreign language. "Owner. I am the owner. I have lived here for 30 years. Get these people out of my house." The lawyer did not blink. He simply tapped a document on his clipboard. "That is where you are mistaken, Mr. Jones. According to the deed transfer and the foreclosure documents filed 3 years ago, you are merely a tenant at will, and as of tonight that will has been revoked. The locks have already been changed. Everything on the lawn is yours. Everything inside the structure belongs to Aura Horizon." Chanel stood on the sidewalk, clutching her arms, looking at her childhood home being emptied out like a hollow shell. The snow was falling harder now, covering their possessions in a white shroud. They were not just homeless. They were exposed. And the man in the suit looked at them not with sympathy, but with the indifference of a reaper coming to collect a debt that was long overdue. The lawyer did not take a step back, despite my father's aggressive posturing. He simply adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and pulled a thick document from his leather portfolio. The floodlights from the moving truck cast long, harsh shadows across the snowy lawn, highlighting the contrast between the pristine legal team and my shivering, disheveled family. "Mr. Jones, I suggest you lower your voice," the lawyer said calmly. "Screaming will not change the fact that you are currently standing on private property belonging to Aura Real Estate Holdings, a subsidiary of the Aura Horizon Group." Desmond looked as if he had been slapped. "Aura," he sputtered. "That is Ebony's company. That is impossible. I bought this house 30 years ago. I raised my children here. My name is on the deed. I have the papers in my safe." The lawyer shook his head slowly, a gesture of pity mixed with professional disdain. He flipped to the second page of the document and held it up for Desmond to see. The paper rattled in the freezing wind. "You may have the original papers in your safe, Mr. Jones, but they are void. You seem to have forgotten the transaction you initiated 5 years ago. You took out a second mortgage and then a third. And when you could not service the debt, you sold the title to a holding company to avoid foreclosure." Desmond froze. The color drained from his face, leaving it as gray as the slush under his feet. He remembered. Of course he remembered, but he had buried that memory under layers of denial and pride. The lawyer continued, his voice relentless. You sold this house to generate liquid capital, capital that you immediately handed over to your son-in-law Kyle Sterling for what he claimed was a guaranteed investment opportunity in cryptocurrency futures. You bet your home on his advice. And when that investment evaporated, you were left with nothing but a lease agreement. My mother Loretta grabbed Desmond's arm, her eyes wide with horror. Dees, what is he talking about? You told me the house was paid off. You told me we were safe. I lied, Desmond whispered, looking at the ground. Kyle said he would double the money. He said he would buy us a mansion in 6 months. The lawyer cleared his throat, bringing their attention back to the cold, hard reality. Since that sale, you have been living here as tenants. However, you have not paid a single cent in rent for 60 months. The holding company allowed you to stay only because an anonymous benefactor covered your monthly payments in full. That benefactor was Ms. Ebony Jones. Chanel gasped, covering her mouth. Ebony, she choked out. She has been paying our rent. Yes, the lawyer replied. For 5 years, Ms. Jones has subsidized your lifestyle, covering the cost of the roof over your heads, while you treated her as a burden. However, as of 5 p.m. this evening, Ms. Jones has ceased all payments. The lease is terminated due to non-payment and breach of contract. You have exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises before the sheriff arrives to forcibly remove you. Desmond's knees gave way. He collapsed onto the wet, snowy driveway, not from the cold, but from the crushing weight of the truth. He had mortgaged his sanctuary to fund a fraud, and the daughter he despised had been the only thing standing between him and the street. Now that shield was gone, and the house he thought was his kingdom was just another asset in Ebony's portfolio. He looked up at the house, but the windows were dark, and the door was locked. The king had been dethroned by his own greed. Chanel stood shivering in the biting wind, her silk dress clinging to her body like a wet second skin. The reality of her situation was crashing down around her, and she did not handle it with grace. She handled it with the vicious entitlement of a child who has never been told no. She turned on her parents, her face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly desperation. Do something, she shrieked, grabbing Desmond by the lapels of his ruined suit jacket and shaking him. You cannot just stand there like a statue. I am Chanel Sterling. I cannot sleep on the street. Look at me, I am freezing. Call someone. Call a hotel. Use your emergency savings. Fix this immediately. Desmond did not move. He stood limp, a puppet whose strings had been cut. He stared blankly at the house he had lost, muttering about interest rates and betrayal. He had nothing left to give her. No money, no influence, no shelter. Loretta watched her golden child shaking her broken father, and something inside her finally snapped. For 30 years, she had put Chanel on a pedestal. She had given her the best clothes, the best food, and all the affection while leaving Ebony to fend for herself. She had believed Chanel was the prize and Ebony was the burden. But standing in the snow, surrounded by the wreckage of her life, the illusion shattered. Get your hands off him, Loretta hissed, stepping forward. Her voice was not the sweet, doting tone she usually used with Chanel. It was low and dangerous, trembling with a mixture of cold and rage. Chanel spun around, her eyes wide. Excuse me. Are you yelling at me? I am the victim here. My husband is in jail and my parents are useless. You are the victim. Loretta laughed, a harsh, manic sound that frightened the lawyer standing guard. You are the reason we are here, Chanel. You. It was you who told us Ebony was selfish. It was you who told us she was jealous of your beauty. You whispered in our ears for years, poisoning us against the only child who actually gave a damn about us. Loretta took a step closer, forcing Chanel to back up toward the pile of wet furniture. We treated Ebony like a dog because you wanted to be the only star in the sky. And look where it got us. Ebony is a billionaire sleeping in a penthouse, and we are standing in the slush because we listened to a parasitic little brat who has never worked a day in her life. Chanel's face turned red. Don't you dare blame me, she spat back, her voice dripping with venom. I didn't tell you to be stupid. I didn't tell Dad to mortgage the house. You did that because you are greedy. You wanted to live like rich people without doing the work. You wanted to brag to your church friends. Don't blame me because you are failures." The word failure hung in the air like a slap. Loretta lunged at her daughter not to hit her, but to grab the faux fur stole Chanel was clutching. "I paid for that coat!" Loretta screamed, tugging at the fabric. "I paid for everything. Give it to me. I am freezing." "No, get off me!" Chanel shrieked, fighting back. "It is mine!" They wrestled on the sidewalk, a pathetic display of a family devouring itself. Mother and daughter fighting over a piece of fake fur, while the neighbors peered through their blinds, witnessing the complete and total implosion of the Jones family dignity. They were no longer a family. They were just desperate people fighting over scraps in the cold. The bickering died instantly as two beams of xenon light cut through the falling snow, blinding the trio on the sidewalk. The silence that followed was heavy and expensive. The midnight black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided to a halt at the curb, its massive tires crushing the slush with barely a sound. The presence of the vehicle was so commanding that even the wind seemed to drop to a respectful whisper. The lawyer and the security team straightened their spines instinctively, stepping back to create a wide berth. They knew who was arriving. The rear suicide door swung open. A pair of stiletto heels hit the pavement sharp and decisive. I stepped out into the frigid night wrapped in a cashmere coat that cost more than the tuition debt Chanel had accumulated. I did not shiver. I did not hunch my shoulders. I stood tall, my chin raised, my eyes scanning the scene with the detached clinical observation of a CEO auditing a failing branch. The woman who used to apologize for taking up space was gone. In her place stood the owner of the block. For a second, my family just stared. They looked at the car, then at the diamonds at my throat, then at the squad of lawyers waiting for my command. The gears in their heads turned frantically, grinding against the rust of their own narcissism. Survival instinct took over. They dropped the hatred instantly and picked up the script they had used to control me for decades. The mask of the loving family was slapped back on, but it was crooked and smeared with desperation. "Ebony, my mother!" Loretta cried out, her voice cracking with a theatrical relief that would have been impressive if I had not seen her trying to strangle Chanel 30 seconds ago. "Oh, thank God. Baby girl, you are here. We were so worried about you." She rushed forward, her arms wide open, ignoring the police tape and the eviction notice. "Look at you. You look beautiful. I always told your father you were destined for greatness. I knew you would come to save us." Desmond scrambled up from the driveway, wiping the slush from his knees. He forced a smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. "That is my daughter," he announced, puffing out his chest, as if he hadn't just been exposed as a fraud. "That is a Jones right there." He pushed past the lawyer, reaching for my hand. "Ebony, tell these men to stand down. They are kicking your parents out of their own home. It is a misunderstanding, obviously. Just sign a check and make them go away. We can laugh about this inside over some hot cocoa." Just like old times, right? Chanel was the fastest to pivot. She shoved her parents aside, tears already streaming down her face, but her eyes were calculating. "Ebony, listen to me. It was Kyle. It was all Kyle. He tricked us. He brainwashed us." She grabbed the lapel of my coat, her fingers digging into the cashmere. "We didn't know he was stealing. We are victims here just like you. We are sisters, Ebony. Blood is thicker than water, remember. You cannot let them do this to me. I have nowhere to go. I am terrified." They surrounded me, a chorus of gaslighting and revisionist history. They tried to touch me, to hug me, to anchor themselves to my success. They truly believed that a few tearful words and a reminder of biological obligation would erase years of neglect. They thought I was still the bank. They thought I was still the doormat. They were wrong. I did not move. I did not hug them back. I simply looked at the lawyer and gave a single, barely perceptible nod. Loretta stepped closer, her eyes brimming with tears that she could summon on command. She reached out with gloved hands to brush a snowflake from my shoulder, a gesture of intimacy that made my skin crawl. You have to understand, baby girl, she crooned, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. Everything I did was for you. I was hard on you, yes. I made you do the chores. I made you work while Chanel played. But do you not see why? I saw the potential in you, Ebony. I knew you were special. I had to be the villain so you could become the hero. I broke you down to build you up. It was tough love, honey. It was all love. She looked at me expecting me to crumble. She expected the desperate daughter who craved validation to fall into her arms and thank her for the abuse. She thought she could rewrite 30 years of neglect with 30 seconds of flattery. I looked at her not with anger, but with the curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen. You call it love? I said, my voice flat and unyielding. That is an interesting revision of history, Mother. But my memory is excellent, and unlike you, I keep receipts. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. I did not unlock the screen. I simply pressed the side button, activating a widget I had placed on the home screen for this exact moment. I held the device up between us. Do you remember Mrs. Gable next door? I asked. Do you remember having coffee on her porch last Thanksgiving while I was inside cooking the dinner you refused to help with? You thought the window was closed. It wasn't. I tapped the screen. The audio was crystal clear, cutting through the winter wind like a knife. Loretta's voice rang out from the speaker, tinny but unmistakable. I swear to God, Susan, I do not know why I keep her around. She is like a leech. She is ugly. She is awkward, and she has zero ambition. I look at Chanel and I see a queen. I look at Ebony and I see a mistake. I should have left her at the orphanage. She is nothing but a burden on my life. The recording ended with the sound of Loretta's cruel laughter, followed by the clinking of a coffee cup. The silence that followed on the snowy driveway was absolute. Loretta stood frozen, her mouth half open, the loving smile dying on her lips like a wilted flower. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking old and hollow. The evidence was irrefutable. It was not tough love. It was hatred, pure and simple. I slid the phone back into my pocket. I watched the realization dawn on her. She could not gaslight a recording. She could not manipulate the truth when it was played back to her in her own voice. You never wanted me to succeed, I said softly, leaning in so only she could hear. You wanted me to fail so you could feel superior. You didn't push me to be a billionaire mother. I became one in spite of you. And that is why you will never see a dime of it. You bet on the wrong horse and you treated the winning one like a mule. Now deal with the mud. I turned my back on my mother, leaving her choking on the sound of her own malice, and shifted my gaze to my sister. Chanel was trembling, but I knew her well enough to know it was not just from the cold. It was the adrenaline of a cornered animal waiting to see if the predator would strike again. She was hugging herself, her fake fur coat muddy at the hem, looking from me to the police lights fading in the distance. She thought the worst was over. She thought Kyle was the sacrifice, and she would somehow survive the night as a tragic victim. I signaled to the lawyer again. He stepped forward, handing me a thick blue folder. I opened it, the pages crinkling in the wind. The ink was still fresh. Let us discuss the reality of your marriage, Chanel, I said, my voice cutting through the wind like a razor. You keep shouting that you are a victim. You claim Kyle tricked you. But the forensic accounting team at Aura Horizon found something very interesting during their audit today. I pulled out a document and held it up. It was a tax form for a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. At the bottom, in looping pretentious cursive, was a signature, Chanel Sterling. Chanel squinted at the paper and her eyes bulged. I do not know what that is, she stammered. Kyle made me sign things. He said they were just for the house. He said it was for tax benefits. I never read them. Ignorance is not a legal defense, I replied. Closing the folder with a sharp snap, Kyle is not just looking at a slap on the wrist. He is facing federal charges for embezzlement, wire fraud, and grand larceny. He stole over $5 million from my company to fund your shopping sprees and your luxury vacations. Given the amount and the mandatory minimums, he is looking at 10 years in a federal penitentiary. Chanel let out a sob, covering her mouth with her hand. 10 years. He will be gone for 10 years. I took a step closer, invading her personal space. That is the good news. The bad news is that by signing these documents, you are not just a wife. You are a co-conspirator. You are the registered owner of the shell corporation he used to launder the stolen money. In the eyes of the law, you are the bagman. My father Desmond groaned loudly, burying his face in his hands, but I ignored him. I kept my eyes locked on Chanel. The district attorney is very interested in this file. If I hand it over to them tonight, they will come for you before sunrise. You will be charged as an accomplice. You will be tried right alongside Kyle. And you will likely share a cell block with him for the next decade. You wanted to be a power couple? Well, this is your chance to do time together. Chanel dropped to her knees in the snow. Please no, she wailed, grabbing the hem of my coat. I cannot go to jail. I am too pretty for jail. I will die in there. Ebony, please, you have to help me. I am your sister. I looked down at her, looking pathetic and small. The power dynamic had completely inverted. I tapped the folder against my palm. There is a way out, I said slowly, letting the words hang in the freezing air. I have the power to bury your involvement. I can classify you as a cooperating witness rather than a defendant. I can save you from prison, Chanel. But you have to make a choice right now. I pointed toward the darkness where the police car had taken her husband. You can stand by your man, keep your marriage vows, and go down with the ship. Or you can turn on him. You can testify against Kyle. You can admit he forced you to sign, and you can walk away free. But you will leave here with absolutely nothing. No husband, no money, no reputation. Just your freedom. Chanel stopped crying instantly. She looked up at me, and I saw the survival instinct flash in her eyes. It was cold, selfish, and immediate. The love she claimed to have for Kyle evaporated the moment her own comfort was threatened. I want to be saved, she whispered without a second of hesitation. I will do anything. Just do not let them take me. The wind howled through the bare branches of the oak trees, but Chanel did not feel the cold anymore. She only felt the terrifying heat of self-preservation. She dropped to her knees in the slush, ruining her stockings and the hem of her dress. She crawled toward me, her hands grasping at the air like a drowning swimmer reaching for a lifeline. The sister who had spent a lifetime looking down on me was now literally at my feet, begging for salvation. Save me, she sobbed, her voice high and frantic. I will do anything, Ebony. I swear it. I never wanted to hurt you. It was Kyle. He is a monster. He is a liar. He ruined everything. I hate him. I will tell the police whatever they need to hear. Just do not let them put me in a cage. I am not built for prison. I will die in there. Please, I am begging you. I looked down at her, watching the tears smear her expensive makeup. It was a pathetic display of loyalty. The moment the ship started sinking, she threw the captain overboard without a second thought. I signaled to the lawyer again. He stepped forward and opened a second file on his clipboard. The papers inside fluttered violently in the wind, but he held them firm. I expected nothing less, I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. You were always good at looking out for number one, Chanel. So here is the deal. This is a standard divorce filing citing irreconcilable differences and criminal misconduct, and this is a sworn affidavit for the district attorney. In it, you admit that Kyle Sterling coerced you into signing the fraudulent tax documents. You will testify against him in open court. You will verify every stolen dollar. You will be the nail in his coffin. Chanel nodded her head so hard I thought her neck would snap. Yes, she gasped, reaching for the lawyer's pen with shaking hands. I will sign it. Give it to me. I will divorce him right now. He is dead to me. She scribbled her name on the dotted line, the ink barely flowing in the freezing temperature. She signed away her marriage and her husband's future in less than 5 seconds. She looked up at me, clutching the clipboard to her chest, hope flaring in her eyes. Is that it? Am I free? Can I go to a hotel now? I laughed a dry, humorless sound that made my parents flinch. Free is a strong word, Chanel. You are free from prison, yes. But you still owe a debt to society, and more importantly, a debt to me. You spent 5 years spending my money. You wore clothes bought with funds stolen from my company. You ate food paid for by my labor, and now you are going to pay it back. I pulled out the final document. It was a single sheet of paper with the Aura Horizon logo at the top. This is an employment contract, I said, handing it to her. It is for an entry-level position. Minimum wage. No benefits. The hours are 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. Chanel squinted at the paper, trying to read the job title in the darkness. What is this? She asked, her voice trembling. Assistant. Coordinator. Sanitation engineer. I corrected her coldly. You are going to be a janitor, Chanel. You will report to the head of maintenance on Monday night. Your duties will include scrubbing the floors, emptying the trash, and cleaning the executive washrooms. Specifically, the washroom attached to my office. You will work there until every cent of the money you stole is repaid. Chanel recoiled as if I had slapped her. A janitor, she whispered. Me. But I am a fashion influencer. I have followers. You cannot make me clean toilets. I leaned down, getting eye level with her. You have a choice. You can wear an orange jumpsuit in a federal prison cell, or you can wear a gray jumpsuit in my office building. Those are your only two options. Decide right now. Chanel looked at the pen in her hand. She looked at the police cruiser fading into the distance. She looked at her ruined manicure. She realized with a crushing certainty that her life as a princess was over. With a sob that sounded like a dying animal, she pressed the pen to the paper and signed her life away. She was no longer Mrs. Sterling, the socialite. She was now the night shift cleaner for the sister she had called a loser. With Chanel currently weeping over her future of scrubbing toilets, I turned my gaze to the architects of this disaster. My parents stood huddled together, their expensive coats offering little protection against the biting wind of their own failure. Desmond looked at me with a flicker of hope in his eyes. He saw his daughter the billionaire, and his mind immediately jumped to the conclusion that he was entitled to a piece of the pie. He adjusted his tie, trying to regain some semblance of the patriarch role he had played so poorly for 30 years. Ebony, he said, his voice trembling but eager. I knew you would not leave us out here. You are a good girl deep down. You always were. So where are we going? The Four Seasons. Or did you buy us a penthouse downtown? I know you have the resources. I looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. The delusion was almost impressive. Even standing in the wreckage of his life, he still believed he was owed a throne. I have made arrangements for you, I stated, my voice cool and professional. I realized that with the foreclosure and the bankruptcy, you would have nowhere to go. So I took the liberty of securing a placement for you both at a facility called Sunset Haven. Desmond's eyes lit up. Sunset Haven, he repeated, tasting the words. It sounds delightful. Is that the new exclusive retirement community on the Gold Coast? The one with the private golf course and the spa? I heard the buy-in fee is $500,000. I knew you would take care of your old man. He elbowed Loretta, who was still staring blankly at the ground. Did you hear that, Loretta? Sunset Haven. We are going to live in luxury. I let him enjoy the fantasy for exactly 3 seconds before I crushed it. It is not on the Gold Coast, Father, I said, cutting him off. It is a state-funded facility on the Lower West Side. It is a public nursing home. Desmond's smile vanished instantly. Public? You mean a state home, like for poor people? I nodded slowly. Exactly. It is a facility for indigent seniors who have no assets, no pension, and no family willing to take them in. It has shared rooms, strictly regulated cafeteria meals, and bingo on Tuesdays. It is not a resort, Desmond. It is a shelter. Desmond looked as if I had spit in his face. But you are a billionaire, he sputtered, his face turning red. You have billions of dollars. You can afford to put us in a palace. Why would you send us to a dump like that? Because I did not lose your money, I replied, stepping closer, my voice hardening. You did. You had a paid-off home. You had a pension. You had savings. And you took every single cent of it and handed it to Kyle Sterling because you wanted to get rich quick. You gambled your security on a con artist because you were greedy. I pointed to the empty driveway where his life used to be. You are not standing here because of me. You are standing here because you made a choice. You chose Kyle over prudence. You chose appearances over substance. And now you are exactly what the state defines as destitute. Loretta finally looked up, her eyes wide with horror. Shared rooms, she whispered. But I need my privacy. I have insomnia. I cannot sleep next to strangers. Then perhaps you should have thought about that before you signed over the deed to your house, I said. I have paid the entrance fee and the first 6 months of care. That is my charity to you. It is more than you ever gave me. The shuttle bus is on its way to pick you up. I suggest you bundle up. It is a long, cold ride to the bottom. The mention of the state-run facility was the final insult that Desmond Jones could endure. The shame of the foreclosure, the humiliation of the police raid, and the public exposure of his financial incompetence had been piling up on his shoulders all night. But the idea of ending his days in a shared room with strangers eating cafeteria mash on a plastic tray was too much for his fragile ego to process. Something inside him snapped. The veneer of the civilized businessman cracked and fell away, revealing the abusive bully he had been behind closed doors for 30 years. He did not see the billionaire CEO standing before him. He did not see the grown woman who commanded empires. All he saw was the quiet, obedient child who used to take his insults with her head bowed. He saw a target for his rage. The muscle memory of violence took over. His face twisted into a snarl of pure hatred, and he lunged forward, his hand raised high in a backhanded arc, destined for my cheek. It was a motion I had seen 1,000 times in my childhood, a reflex of cruelty whenever I failed to meet his impossible standards. "You ungrateful little wretch!" he screamed, his voice ragged with fury. "How dare you speak to me like that? I am your father. I made you." But the blow never landed. Before his hand could come within a foot of my face, the air was filled with a sharp crack. It was not the sound of flesh hitting flesh, but the sound of Desmond's wrist being caught in a grip of iron. The lead security officer, a man named Marcus, who had been a Navy SEAL, moved with a speed that the human eye could barely track. He intercepted Desmond's swing, stopping it dead in mid-air. With a subtle twist of his wrist, Marcus applied exactly enough pressure to immobilize the threat and bring Desmond to his knees in the snow. Desmond let out a yelp of pain, his aggression instantly replaced by shock. He looked up at the bodyguard, confused as to why his authority was being physically challenged. "Let go of me," he sputtered. "That is my daughter. I have the right to discipline her." Marcus did not speak. He simply looked at me, waiting for the order to either release the man or break his arm. I stared down at my father kneeling in the slush, his arm twisted behind his back, his face contorted in pain. For the first time in my life, I did not flinch. I did not step back. I did not apologize for provoking him. I stood my ground, my expression as cold and hard as the diamonds around my neck. "Let him go, Marcus," I said softly. The bodyguard released his grip and shoved Desmond backward. My father stumbled, clutching his bruised wrist, looking at me with a mixture of fear and loathing. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to launch another tirade, but I cut him off with a gaze so piercing it silenced him instantly. "Do not ever try to touch me again, Desmond." My voice was low, but it carried the weight of absolute finality. I stepped closer to him, my heels clicking on the pavement. Those days are over. I am not the frightened little girl hiding in her room waiting for the storm to pass. I am not the daughter you use as a punching bag when the world does not give you what you want. I gestured to the house he had lost and the car I arrived in. "Look at the reality of the situation. You are not the patriarch here. You are a liability. I am not your child right now. I am the woman who owns the debt you cannot pay. I am your creditor, Desmond. And creditors do not tolerate assault." If you ever raise a hand to me again, I will not have my security stop you. I will have them put you in a cell so deep the sunlight will never find you. Do you understand me?" Desmond looked at me, and for the first time he saw the truth. The power had shifted permanently. He nodded slowly, his eyes dropping to the ground defeated. The bus for the nursing home turned the corner, its headlights cutting through the snow, signaling the end of his reign. A rusted white Ford Econoline van turned the corner, its brakes squealing as it ground to a halt behind my sleek Rolls-Royce. The contrast was a visual punchline. On the side of the dented metal, a faded blue decal read, "Sunset Haven State Assisted Living." It was not the luxury coach Desmond had hallucinated. It was a transport for the forgotten, smelling faintly of bleach and old tires. The driver, a heavy-set man with tired eyes and a clipboard, stepped out into the snow. He did not look like a concierge. He looked like a man who wanted to finish his shift. "Jones?" he barked, checking his list. "I have a pickup for two. Desmond and Loretta. Let us go, folks. I do not have all night." The reality finally pierced Desmond's delusion. He looked at the van, then at the driver, and then at me. Panic set in. "No," he shouted, backing away until he hit the moving truck. "I am not getting in that thing. It looks like a prison transport." "Ebony, tell him. Tell him who I am." "You are a resident of Sunset Haven," I said simply, "and you are holding up traffic." The driver moved forward, his patience non-existent. He grabbed Desmond's arm, not with malice, but with the indifferent efficiency of someone who dealt with reluctant seniors every day. "Come on, Pops. We have got a warm bed for you. Stop making a scene." Desmond fought his boots slipping in the slush. "I am a property owner. I demand to speak to my lawyer." But his protests were swallowed by the wind. Loretta was weeping openly, her mascara staining her face like war paint. She looked at me one last time, her eyes searching for the daughter she had manipulated for years, hoping for one last reprieve, one last check, one last save. I did not blink. I did not look away. I simply stood there, a statue of ice, watching the consequences of their actions unfold. There was no Hollywood ending here. There was no tearful embrace, no sudden forgiveness, no promise to visit on Sundays. They had spent 30 years planting seeds of resentment and neglect. Tonight they were finally harvesting the crop. Loretta was guided into the van, her sobbing echoing until the heavy sliding door slammed shut, sealing them inside the dim cabin. As the taillights of the nursing home van faded into the darkness, a second vehicle pulled up. It was a gray cargo van, with the Aura Horizon Maintenance logo stenciled on the door. The window rolled down, and a woman in a heavy work jacket leaned out. "Chanel Sterling," she called out, checking a tablet. Chanel stepped forward, shivering violently, her ruined dress clinging to her legs. "I am Chanel," she whispered. The woman threw a bundle of gray fabric out the window. It landed in the slush at Chanel's feet. "Put that on. It is your uniform. We are short-staffed tonight, and the executive washrooms on the 40th floor are a disaster. You start in 20 minutes. Get in the back." Chanel looked at the polyester jumpsuit, then at me. She wanted to scream, she wanted to beg, but she saw the look on my face. It was the look of a CEO who had just closed a bad deal. She bent down, picked up the uniform, and climbed into the back of the maintenance van without a word. I stood alone on the sidewalk. The snow was falling harder now, covering the footprints of the family that used to live here. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was not sadness. It was not guilt. It was weightlessness. The anchors were gone. I turned around and walked back to my Phantom. The driver opened the door and I slid into the warmth of the leather interior. "Drive," I said softly. "I have a company to run." The silence on the driveway was different now. It was not the heavy, oppressive silence of my childhood, the kind that came before a storm of yelling. It was a clean, hollow silence. The snow fell softly, covering the footprints of the people who had tried to bury me. The moving truck had rumbled away. The police cruiser was gone. The vans carrying my past to a nursing home and a cleaning shift had disappeared around the corner. I stood alone in front of the peeling white siding of the house that had been my prison for 30 years. It looked small now, insignificant. Just a rotting pile of wood and drywall that had held too much fear and not enough love. A man in a thick wool coat stepped out from the shadows near the sidewalk. He was the project manager for Aura Real Estate, waiting patiently for my command. He looked at the house with a critical eye, noting the sagging porch and the water damage on the eaves. He did not see a home. He saw a tear down. I reached into the pocket of my cashmere coat and pulled out the single brass key. It was the key my father had worn on his belt loop, a symbol of his petty tyranny. He used to dangle it over my head, threatening to lock me out if I was 5 minutes late. Now it sat in my palm, cold and powerless. I tossed it through the air. The metal flashed under the street lamp before landing in the project manager's gloved hand. "What are the instructions, Ms. Jones?" he asked, his breath clouding in the freezing air. "Do we renovate? Do we flip it? The market in this area is recovering." I looked at the dark windows where I had spent countless nights crying myself to sleep, wishing I was anyone else. I looked at the spot on the porch where my mother used to sit and list my flaws. "No," I said, my voice steady and final. "Do not renovate a single board. Demolish it. I want it leveled by morning. Scrape the earth clean until there is no trace that the Jones family ever existed here." The manager nodded, tapping a note into his phone. "And the land? What do you want to build on the lot?" "A rental unit." I shook my head. "Build a park," I said. "A playground. Put in the best equipment money can buy. Bright colors, soft turf, swings that go high enough to touch the sky, and make it free. Open the gates to every child in this neighborhood who needs a place to escape. Turn this monument of misery into a sanctuary for them. Let the sound of laughter drown out the ghosts of this house." I turned my collar up against the wind and walked away. I did not look back. The structure behind me was already dead. The Rolls-Royce Phantom was waiting at the curb, its engine purring softly, a beast ready to serve its master. My driver opened the rear door and I slid into the warmth of the leather interior, closing the heavy door on the south side forever. Zara, my executive assistant, was waiting inside, reviewing the schedule on her tablet. The soft blue glow of the screen illuminated her face. "It is nearly midnight, Ms. Jones," she said efficiently. "The gala is over. The press releases regarding the acquisition of Sterling and Company have gone out. The transition team is ready for the morning briefing. Where would you like to go now? Home to the penthouse." I sat back, sinking into the plush seat. The city skyline twinkled in the distance, a kingdom that was finally mine. I reached up and slowly removed my dark sunglasses, revealing eyes that were no longer tired or apologetic. They were burning with a cold, victorious fire. I looked at Zara and smiled a smile that promised that justice was far from finished. "No, not home," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Take us to the federal courthouse. I hear the arraignments start first thing in the morning." I smoothed the fabric of my dress, staring straight ahead at the road to the future. "I want to be there when they walk him in," I whispered. "I want a front row seat to the trial of Kyle Sterling." Drive. The saga of Ebony Jones serves as a brutal yet beautiful reminder that your value is never determined by how others treat you, but by what you build when no one is watching. While her family focused on the appearance of wealth, flashy cars, designer clothes, and empty titles, Ebony focused on the substance of power, ownership, equity, and leverage. The most critical lesson here is that toxicity often hides behind the mask of family or loyalty, but loyalty without reciprocity is merely exploitation. Ebony's journey teaches us that you are not obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep ungrateful people warm. True freedom comes when you stop seeking validation from those committed to misunderstanding you and start charging them full price for your access. She proves that the most dangerous thing you can do to a hater is to succeed without them. Sometimes the only way to save your future is to bankrupt your past and evict the people who only love you for what you can provide. Success is the best revenge, but peace is the ultimate luxury. Are you holding on to toxic relationships that are weighing down your potential? Share this story if you believe in the power of setting boundaries and building your own empire in silence.